Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be giving my thoughts and reviews on some of the cards that have been revealed so far for the Brothers in Arms expansion that is going to be coming out June 27th, I believe. So if you haven't seen these cards, there is a cards reveal channel in the main cards Discord where they are announced as they are revealed. They're being revealed through different means. Through official streams, the podcast, coming up. There's going to be various content creators, including possibly myself, who will be revealing cards, so keep an eye out on that. But for that, and I'm not going to do with my reviews every time a new card is posted, since that would be a lot of videos, so I'm going to wait, and maybe do one about once a week to show my thoughts on all of the cards that have been collected so far. So, starting off with with the first card here, is Pathfinders. Now, okay, so I should start with the 50th Infantry Regiment and explain the new mechanic in this expansion is Veteran. So, what Veteran means is essentially the card is going to have some sort of goal you need to achieve, and if that goal is achieved, the unit will transform into its veteran form. So, in this case, with the 50th Infantry Regiment, it's a 2-cost 3/2, and it becomes veteran when it moves into the front line. So, if this moves into the front line, it will transform into a 4/3 with ambush. This means if it is damaged, it will heal. If it had its attack or health buffed, it will be reduced down. It will turn into a 4/3 no matter what its initial stats are prior to the transformation. I believe it will keep effects. So, for example, if there's a supply shortage played on this and it goes down to a 3/1, if you move it to the front line, it will turn into a 4/3 ambush, but it will keep the supply shortage effect, I believe. I'm not 100% certain on that. But that's essentially how the effect works. So there will be different things. I mean, if we quickly take a look at the Pathfinders, the Veteran is, if this destroys, deployment deal 2 damage. If this destroys a unit, it becomes Veteran. So what do I think on the Veteran mechanic as a whole? I think this is really, really cool. Probably my favorite mechanic so far. There's a lot of room to build with this moving forward, a lot of different tools. Now, obviously, this one is sort of the most basic example of it, just when it moves to the front line, get +1/+1 in ambush. However, I mean, this card, I think, is just intended to be very simple, just so people can wrap their heads around the Veteran effect. However, simple aside, I think this card actually is potentially pretty good. Now, I don't think this is going to be like a throw it into a German aggro deck immediately, but a 4/3 ambush is a very powerful effect, because it essentially goes 2-for-1 unless your opponent has a very specific order, and there's not a lot of tempo decks that are going to be fighting for the front line typically do not have a lot of orders that are going to be used as removal. So if this can consistently get to the front line, this is going to be a very, very good card. However, that is the problem. If it can't consistently get to the front line, you're playing a 2-cost 3/2 infantry, and that's just not good. Just on its own, that is not particularly good. So, I don't think I'm going to really do like a star rating, because I think that it is dependent on so much with what decks are meta, what cards are meta, what other cards might be revealed later down the line. So just my current thoughts, I think this is pretty good. I think it is possible it will see some play, but other than that, solid draft card. Then we get to Pathfinders. So as previously mentioned, the initial effect is deployment deal 2 damage to a unit. So this is pretty similar to Kitty Hawk, where the big difference is Kitty Hawk is deal 2 damage to a ground target, so it can hit HQ but not air units. This can hit air units but not HQ. It is deal 2 damage to a unit for a 3-cost 2/2 with so 3-cost 2/2 Battlecry deal 2 damage. Deployment effect deal 2 damage. Now that's not a terrible effect. It's not an insane effect. It's substantially worse than Raiding Brigade, for example. It's probably a little worse than Kitty Hawk just on that. However, if that 2 damage kills a unit, it gains Veteran, and the Veteran form has Blitz, with the effect at the start of your turn, a random enemy unit retreats, which can snowball incredibly hard. So consider this. You are in some sort of frontline mirror, and you have a 2 health unit on board, so you have a half-track on board on turn 3. Your opponent plays Pathfinders on turn 3 to kill your half-track, and then they leave their Pathfinders in the support line. Now, if you can't kill it, at the start of their turn, one of your cards retreats, which means you can't just play down a 4-drop because it will be retreated instantly. Now, this is retreat, not return to hand, so for example, in that example, if you did a turn 4 5th Rangers pushed it to the front line, it would then be sent back to the support line, which is still really annoying. But if you're a control deck, for example, and you want to do something like a turn 4 T-60 or a turn 5 armored train, now, this is just going to be very... Well, with the armored train, I could retreat the infantry, but this card is potentially really annoying. Now, it's a 2-2, so it's not... It doesn't gain any extra stats when it becomes veteran, so it's still pretty easy to kill. The Blitz's effect is pretty interesting, because it means that this is a fine card later in the game. You can essentially play it as somewhat of a Raiding Brigade-esque card. And even if the effect isn't going to trigger, you can still just play this, deal 2 damage, get a Blitz unit, trade with something else, move forward. So I think all around this is a really solid card. It will almost certainly go into frontline. Now, we have Strong Bond, a 4-cost British order. Friendly unit gets a guard, and add a US 3-cost unit to your support line at the start of your turn. So this is a friendly buff card. So it's a 4-cost order. You target a friendly unit with it. I know the text is a little bit weird, probably because they didn't want it to get too long of a card text. So how good is the effect of Gain Guard? I mean, Gain Guard is not worth a lot. It is friendly ground unit, so this does unlock a couple things. So for example, you could give like an IS-2 guard, which would be pretty decent. Now, how good is the effect? Add a 3-cost US unit to your support line at the start of your turn. This is a very, very powerful effect. This can snowball very, very hard. It's also a very high RNG card because there is a very wide range of 3-cost US units. So, there is cards like Skytrain, which will then start snowballing on their own. There's really bad cards like Half Track. There's the 1-1 Texas Infantry. There's some decent cards like the 1-3 Blitz Artillery. And then there's some like absolutely huge cards like there's the 5-5 Infantry. So, the 6-6 Infantry. So, essentially, this card is just generate value. Now, it's at the start of your turn, so if you play this on a card and it gets removed instantly, you essentially spent 4 credits to give a card guard, which is terrible. Now, if you can stick this on a unit that somehow doesn't die, however, it gaining guard means it is easier for the opponent to kill, since you can't really protect it. This can snowball really, really hard. So I think this was going to be a very, very good draft card. I think at 4 cost, and you gain the unit at the start of your turn, I don't think this is going to see competitive play, which I think is a very, very good thing, because if this saw competitive play, if this was slightly better, if this was 3 cost at the start of your turn, at the end of your turn, something like that, I think this would be insane. So I'm glad that this is a pretty mediocre card. Then we have a not-so-mediocre card, 6th Air Landing Brigade. So, 6th Air Landing Brigade is a 2-cost infantry for Britain. It's an elite, and it is a 1-4 body, which immediately not that great. It has Fury, not that great. The effect, when a friendly unit would deal 1 combat damage, it deals 3 instead. Now, the question is, how good is this effect? I don't think it is particularly great, in terms of other units. Like, you can obviously build a deck around this. This works with ground units, it works with air units, so you can run this with the Swordfishes, the Gladiators, you can run this. There's the 2-pounders are 1 attack artillery. There's a lot of things that have 1 attack in Britain. However, it's a single copy, it's an elite. I don't think you can build a deck around this. It's pretty comparable to London Brigade, which I think is just a better card. Now, where this card gets insane is the fact that it applies to itself. So this means it's essentially a 2-cost 3/4 Fury, which is really, really good. Now, it's not quite as good as a 3-cost or a 3/4 Fury, because if your opponent attacks into it, no, actually, sorry, when the opponent attacks into it, it's still combat damage. So this actually will still act as a 3-cost or a 3-attack unit for the opponent trading into it. So this is just quite strong as essentially just an aggro stomper. Like if your opponent's playing frontline, let's say, and they get a Greyhound down, they get like the Red Devils to the front line, they're trying to flood the front line for a Blitzkrieg setup, or we could do it, and you just play this on 2, and then on turn 3, you can just kill the Red Devils and the Greyhound, and you're still left with a 3/2 Fury. This is a very powerful card on its own, and I think that's okay. I don't think you need this with other stuff. Now, obviously, there's got to be people who are going to try to build decks around this. I don't think they're going to be good, but I think this on its own could be a staple of, like a staple anti-aggro card in just any British deck, but like particularly British control. Then we get the 49th Karachekov. I'm probably butchering that. Apologies. It is a 3-cost 3/4 infantry guard for Soviets. It's a limited. Now, there's one other card for Soviets, which is the 3-cost 3/4 guard body. It is the second rifles. It has +2 attack against blitz units. Pretty good. I've run it before just on its own. This has the passive effect: when an enemy unit becomes veteran, deal 2 damage to it. So this, if we go back to Pathfinders, for example, like if you play Pathfinders to deal 2 damage to a unit and destroy it, if Karachekov, however you pronounce this, is on the board, that Pathfinders will die immediately, because it takes 2 damage, and it's a 2/2, so it will die. So this card, the strength of this card rises and falls on the popularity of Veteran. Not the strength of Veteran, but the popularity of Veteran. Because if there's one deck that you see maybe 5% of the time that runs a lot of Veteran cards, you're not going to run this as like just this one-of-tech card. Because also just, I'm assuming most Veteran cards are going to have more than 2 health in their Veteran form. Pathfinders is the only one released so far, I believe, that has 2 health initially. So you're not like just going to be using this to like hard stomp your opponent. Now, obviously, if you have multiple of these, things can start to get wild. But how popular is Pathfinders going? Or sorry, how popular is Veteran going to be as a whole? I think that has yet to be seen. So until then, I think it's a fine card. It's a fine tech card. I don't think this has any place in competitive unless Veteran decks are incredibly popular. Then we have another Soviet card. It's a 3-cost Soviet order, the Mighty Fall. Destroy target Veteran unit. Now, so it seems Soviets is getting the anti-Veteran cards. I think this is significantly worse than Karachekov. I'm probably butchering Karachekov. Now, the Mighty Fall, it's essentially like, for Glory, the 2-cost to destroy an enemy elite unit in Japan, except substantially worse, because every single deck is going to run elite units, and some are better than others, and 2-cost destroy an elite unit, pretty good. This is 3-cost to destroy a Veteran unit, which most decks probably won't have any, and if they do, they will probably have less of them than they have elite units. So this card, I mean, it exists so that when people are getting raffle stomped by like the max Veteran decks on like a week into the game, or a week into the expansion release, when like people are just playing a deck with every single Veteran card and just slamming like 8/8s after 8/8s or whatever, that people have a fun answer to that. I don't think this is going to see any play. Outside of that, in draft, in ranked, low rank, high rank, I don't think this card is going to see any play. But I think it's a fine card to exist. Then we have Battle Valor, a 5-cost US order. Target unit becomes Veteran if able, then gets +2/+4. So this is quite a powerful effect. It immediately upgrades a Veteran effect, and then gives it +2/+4 on top of the Veteran body. So, for example, on Pathfinders, if you deal 2 damage but it doesn't destroy the unit, and then you play Battle Valor on it, you turn Pathfinders into a 4/6 that retreats an enemy unit, a 4/6 Blitz that retreats an enemy unit at the start of every turn. Or if you play it on the Panzer Grenadier, the I think that's what it was, the German one, the 3-2 that becomes the 4-3 ambush, that will become a 6-7 ambush, which is huge. Except, the main thing that holds Battle Valor back is it costs 5, and the immediate impact does not seem particularly strong currently. And this already requires you to have a veteran unit on the board that has not had its veteran effect triggered, and will not have its veteran effect triggered without Battle Valor. Because if you're going to trigger the veteran effect anyways, you don't want to run a 5 cost +2/+4. That is a terrible deal. So you're going to be wanting to run this in a deck that has a lot of veteran cards, and a lot of them are conditional, and you are not going to be constantly hitting those conditions, and then also you have the credits to have that veteran card down on the board, and the credits to play Battle Valor. So all around, it's difficult to imagine this in a competitive landscape. However, if you just want to build like a veteran ramp deck and have some fun on ladder, I'm sure you're going to run this card, and I'm sure it's going to work out great. Like, I could see this maybe if there is a competitive veteran deck that runs like maybe 1 or 2 of these. But again, 5 cost for this is really steep. And it's correct to have it this steep. I'm not saying that this card should cost 4 or something. This is a very powerful effect. So it's good that it costs 5. I'm just not sure if you can really afford to run a card like this. Then we have a very interesting card, Field Hospital. Fully repair each friendly unit. Draw a card for each unit repaired. A 4-cost special US order. So US is losing mobilization. It's being rotated, and that's the primary US draw. It's 5-cost, draw 3. This is 4-cost, draw for each friendly unit repaired, for fully repairing all units. So if you play this and you have 3 damaged units, this is cheaper mobilization that also heals your units. And if you have 4, 5, 6 damaged units, this is just so much better than mobilization. Now, if you have 0 damaged units, this card literally does nothing. It is a 4-cost to do absolutely nothing if you do not have damaged units. So the question is, how easy is it going to be to get damaged units on the board? Now, this is definitely not a card you could just throw into any deck, because, like, I don't know, a deck like Ramp, where you're just ramping up credits and then playing your Avengers and your B-17s, you're probably not going to have a lot of damaged units, like more than 1 damaged unit on the board at any given time. You can't just run Field Hospital as your card draw. You're going to need to be running Quartermasters, Lend-Leases, whatever. Now, if you build a mid-range deck that's maybe slightly slower, maybe not a Blitzkrieg version, but like a medical brigade kind of deal, like a medical battalion kind of deal, triple we can do it, where you get these units, you buff the health up a lot, you play a lot of them, and maybe they're a bit slower, but they slowly take value trades and get damaged, and you can be Field Hospitaling for 3, 4, 5 cards. I mean, even Field Hospital for 2 is still a very good effect. Field Hospital on 3 or above is a strong effect. Now, just how often is that going to happen? I think it's too early to see. Is there going to be cards that help this sort of high health, maybe cards that deal some friendly damage? Because it would kind of suck if you were restricted to run this in a Soviet type of deck where you're running Winter Warfares to self-damage your own units. I think we have to wait and see to evaluate this card, but its potential, it has a lot of potential for a different type of frontline archetype. Then we have one of my favorite cards revealed so far, the Matsumoto Regiment, a 3-cost, 0 operation, Japanese infantry. It is a special. It is a 3/4, deal 1 damage to the enemy HQ when a destruction effect triggers. So it's essentially a signal regiment, an extra signal regiment. You can run 2 copies of them, exclusively for units with destruction effect. And the body is actually quite good. A 3-cost, 3/4, 0 off body, I think, is definitely playable. And this makes me very excited, because it makes me think maybe there's room for a Japanese mid-range deck that it's sort of like a Japanese burn deck, not mid-range, but like a Japanese burn deck that doesn't rely on a ton of very, very cheap cards to get the board early, deal a bunch of face damage, and then feign retreat into an infinite amount of cards, but just a ton of destruction effects that slowly chip away at the opponent's health total while being big enough to fight for the board. So instead of the 2 bicycles, 2 Yokosukas, 3 cavalry regiments just to get them. You play maybe 3 cavalries, because you would likely want to be running expansion in there. But then 4 Akitas, 4 Mito regiments. There is another 1 cost to destruction effect Japanese unit that we are going to see later on. Maybe you run some of those. And maybe that is enough to replace Feigned Retreat, because Feigned Retreat is being rotated, and maybe the solution isn't building just bad Feigned Retreat Jagra, where you try to replace Feigned Retreat and the Eratos with expansions and the Edge of the Empire. Maybe the solution is the deck gets a little bit slower and becomes more burn-oriented, and I think this Matsumoto Regiment right here has a lot of potential, because it's also not when a unit with destruction dies, it's when a destruction effect triggers, which means stacking additional destruction effects on your units will deal additional damage with Matsumoto Regiment. Cards like the Yamoto, or the, I forget the name of the card, but it's the give your units destruction draw card. There's a lot of possibility with this, and I would be kind of surprised if we didn't see more destruction effect synergy cards come out in this expansion. This is the aforementioned 1 cost destruction effect. The 56th Recon Regiment, or the 56th Recon, a 1 cost, 1 operation, Japanese infantry, 2/1, intel 1, destruction, deal 1 damage to each enemy unit. So, this card immediately seems really, really powerful. Its destruction effect is essentially a Tora Tora. Now, obviously it doesn't hit HQ, so this doesn't act as the burn, but combined with Matsumoto Regiment, this can deal 1 damage to HQ as well. But just a 1 cost 2/1 destruction, deal 1 damage to each enemy unit. Now, 30 seconds is being rotated, but just imagine for a second you play in frontline, and you have all your 30 seconds, and you play a 30 second on 1, your opponent plays 56th Recon on 1. What do you do? Because you can't just play 2 more 30 seconds, because they will just die. If this 56th dies, all of those 30 seconds will die. And if you move up to try to trade out the 56th Recon, you don't really want to play a second 30 second, because then your opponent will trade, you lose that 30 second, and then they get a credit advantage and you're down units. Except you also don't really want to push a Greyhound to the front line, because then they will trade the 56th Recon into the Greyhound, it drops to a 1/1, and then the destruction effect will kill the 32nd and the Greyhound. The same thing with the Red Devils. So this is a very, very powerful card that, like, this is a potentially, not meta-defining card, but a card that could warp the early game of tempo decks and aggressive decks around this card in a very interesting way. And I really like that for Japan, because previously Japan was just cavalry regiments, bicycle regiments, chuck everything to the front line. This kind of leads to a different situation. And also the Intel 1 on top of that I think is really interesting. I don't think this particularly fits into Legions, like a Japan-Poland Legions deck. I mean, you can run it in Legions, it's probably not bad, but I don't think that is the primary place we are going to see that, which means that this Intel 1 is just sort of some additional information the Japan player has to work with, and I think that's really neat. Like, they could have made this a 0 op cost and take it off the Intel, something like that. I think having this be slightly slower, but in return for getting Intel 1 to just get some extra information to work with, allow for bigger brain plays, I really like that. And losing Feigned Retreat was a really big deal, losing Desperate Measures was a really big deal, but the 2 Japanese cards that we've just seen, I think are both very, very interesting and have a lot of potential for interesting decks. Then we have the Yak 9 PL, a 4-cost, 2-operation Polish fighter. I believe this is, I will actually double check this. I am not sure what the exile is for. It's a Yak, which makes me think it's probably an exile for Soviets. You really wish that this was an exile for Britain, because most of the Polish plain exiles are British. So I just confirmed this is exile for Soviets, and it has the passive effect. All of your exile units have Blitz, including this. This itself has Blitz just immediately. So this is a 4-cost, 3/5 Blitz plane. On its own, not great, not terrible. And all of your other exile cards have Blitz, meaning that Spitfire, the 5/6 Spitfire, that will have Blitz. Those bombers will have Blitz. The bomber that snowballs with heavy armor stuff will have Blitz. And if you run this in a British deck with the card that reduces the cost of exile cards, and then the card that buffs exile cards as you play them. And then that card will have Blitz if you play this. And I think this is the key the Exile deck was missing, because the Exile deck had a very powerful way to get a lot of cards onto the board early. The problem is, then they just do nothing, and it passes to your opponent's turn, and then your opponent kills them all. It's kind of like Alpine. And this is sort of... I'm not saying that this is going to make a Exile deck tier 1. I'm not even saying that this will make an Exile deck tier 2. I think that deck still has a lot of problems, and this is only a special. But I think if you are an Exile player, you are going to be very happy this card exists, because it's going to make your decks much better. And I think that's fine. Then we have the Fiat CR32. It's a Italian 2-cost 1/3 fighter with the text, when your HQ gains defense, fully repair a random friendly unit. Now, immediately, this effect feels kind of meh. Then you might think, well, maybe you could run this, like, do a US-Italy repair deck. But that's not great, because how often are you increasing your HQ? Like, really just with We Can Do It in US, and that's already probably healing all of your units. You would need a unit damage more than 3 to even get the heal effect off of that Fiat. And Mare Nostrum's rotating, so it might be easy to just scratch this card off as, oh, this card looks terrible. I would like to bring your attention to this plus the 7th Alpini Regiment can lock your opponent out if they don't have an answer to one of these two cards. Now, obviously, there's a lot of answers. You can half-track the 7th Alpini, you can patrol, dive bombing, strategic bombing, whatever. All of those were US mid-range cards, but that's just what I've been playing a lot of lately. But if you get the 7th Alpini, which is the 4/7 guard whenever your HQ gains defense equal to the damage that this unit deals, if your opponent attacks into that with anything that has less than 7 attack to kill it outright, if your opponent hits into it with, say, a Sherman to bring it from a 4/7 to a 4/3, your HQ will gain 4 defense, and then this Fiat will heal the 4/3 back to a 4/7, and you have gotten absolutely nothing. Which means, if you get the 7th Alpini and the Fiat guarded by the 7th Alpini, and your opponent doesn't have an answer to either card, they immediately lose the game, because they will just constantly trade their entire board into the 7th Alpini, and it will just constantly be getting healed back to full. Now, this is a very specific combo that requires specific things to set up, and it's probably not that good. However, just be aware of this. Maybe this is something you want to try. I'm not sure. It feels like it's something that wouldn't be that hard to set up, and it would not be something that would be that unlikely that your opponent doesn't have an answer to it for at least 2 or 3 turns. I'm not saying that they need to never have an answer to it, but, like, say you're against Jagro, and they have a huge board, and you play 7th Alpini and Fiat, and it takes them 3 or 4 turns to draw into a Sendai. That's 3 or 4 turns where they cannot attack your HQ, and you're presumably attacking with that to heal 4 every turn on your own turn. That is huge. So I think this card, not that great, but potentially scary on ladder. Then we have another veteran card. This time it's a British 3-cost, 2-op, 3/3 fighter. It's another Hurricane. And this one, it becomes veteran when it survives combat. So this is somewhat similar to the Buffalo. The veteran form is a 5/5 fighter, no text. So essentially, you play this as a 3-cost, 3/3 fighter, and if your opponent hits into it, or if they don't and you attack something and it survives combat damage, it will turn into a 5/5 fighter. So if you hit this 3/3 into a 2/3, it goes down to a 3/1, but then it will turn into a 5/5, because remember, your unit, all of the unit changes, so it doesn't matter if it's damaged before when it becomes veteran. So, is this a good card? Not really. It's probably a fine card in draft. It's probably a fine card at lower collections. I don't think this is going to be fitting into Brit Air. Mostly because it doesn't have Blitz, it doesn't have a deployment effect. Your opponent is just not going to attack into it if they can't kill it, and if they can, they will kill it immediately. And then you just play a 3-cost 3/3 fighter, which is not that great. Then we have the Key 45 Dragonslayer. I have seen a lot of people very excited about this. I mean, because immediately it looks like key number 2. Key being the elite key the 4-cost 6/5 fighter with the text, at the start of your turn, you draw an extra card, your opponent draws 2 extra cards. Now, this card becomes Veteran. Its base body is a 4/3. It becomes the 6/5 Veteran if this is the first Dragonslayer key you have deployed this battle. Meaning, if you run 1 copy of this and you find it, despite being limited, if you only run 1 copy as if it is an elite, it is just a 4-cost 6/5 fighter. Now, if you run 2 or 3 copies of this because you want to be more likely to find it, the first one you play will still be that 4-cost 6/5 fighter body, but every other one you play after that point will just be a 4-cost 4/3. Now, I've seen a lot of people saying that they're very good things about this card. I don't think this card is good. Maybe you run one of them in just like a sort of mid-rangey style, slightly slower style Japan deck, maybe. I think that is a huge maybe. I just don't think this card is very good. You definitely never run more than one of these. Just 4/3 body is so terrible for a fighter that does absolutely nothing, and a 4-cost 6/5 body is very overrated. I've seen a lot of people saying, comparing this to Key and being like, oh, it's just a second Key. Well, importantly, Key draws you cards. That is the main reason people run Key. It's not for the 4-cost 6/5 body, it's for the fact that it draws you cards. And your opponent has to kill it, because if they don't, not only do they take the 6 damage, you're also drawing additional cards every turn into other aggressive stuff. This is just a 6/5 body. I mean, it's comparable to the Trop, the 4-cost plane that becomes a 6/6 if you have an infantry and a tank, or the 4-cost Fiat that if you have 5 or more health than your opponent is a 6/6 when you play it. I mean, both of those are 6/6s compared to 6/5s, and those conditions are pretty easy to meet, and you can run multiple of them. They would standard and limited respectively, and those see 0 competitive play, so I don't see why this would really see competitive play either. Then we have Seabees, which is just a very fun card to call, or to say Seabees, which is a 2-cost, 1 operation, US infantry, 1/3 body, not anything special about any of that so far, with the effect, when a friendly unit is fully repaired, reduce its operation cost by 1, and give it +1 attack. Now, this card is very, very interesting, for 2 reasons. One, I think that this suggests that repair US is going to be pushed this expansion. This isn't just oh, we threw out a random repair card. This is there's now multiple cards are built around this. I'm assuming we're going to see a theme. There's also already a couple repair cards in the game already. Like there's the Infantry Regiment that summons a second copy of it in your support line if you repair it. And all of the cards that you really want to be repairing have operation costs, whether it's 1 or 2. They are generally big units, and big units generally have high operation cost. So Seabees is going to make those operate cheaper and gain attack, and this is a very integral card for a deck like that, because previously it was just so slow. You'd play these slow units, and then you would you'd spend credits trading in with them, and then you'd spend more credits healing them, and then you'd get more copies of slow units, and it was just incredibly slow. But with Seabees, suddenly things get fast. Things are starting to speed up. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to be meta. I mean, current frontline seems just ludicrously strong, and current frontline would not want a card like Seabees. But if we see maybe 1 or 2 more repair cards, whether it's this expansion or the next expansion, I think repair is starting to get a lot more interested as an archetype. I mean, I think already it's probably better than T-34, the archetype with the Spitfire archetype. So yeah, I'm very interested to see more US cards. Then we have Naval Engagement, and I have not seen an adequate amount of hype about this card. I think this card is incredibly powerful, and I think this card just straight up replaces Decima in any Italy control decks. Now, I think maybe a part of why there's not a lot of hype about this is Mare Nostrum is being rotated, so I think a lot of people are just thinking, well, Italy Control is dead. There's not Mare Nostrum anymore. I think you can run Italy Control without Mare Nostrum. Probably not German Italy, because Germany does lack healing. But Britain, Italy, Soviet Italy, I think those are both still real possibilities, and I think you would definitely run this card. So it's a 9-cost order fully repair all units in your support line. Not a particularly useful effect. And again, I do not think this US-Italy repair deck is going to be a thing. I know we've now seen 2 Italy cards that say repair. I don't think these decks have any overlap. But the important part of this card is the second sentence: destroy all enemy units in the support line. Destroy all units in the enemy support line, sorry. And this is where I think this card gets insane. Because, I mean, when you're playing Decima, you're already kind of playing Decima as an anti-control card, and I think that's fine. I think it's fine to have this anti-control card. That's not going to be particularly great, or be played most of the time, into any sort of aggressive deck. However, control has almost all of its units in the support line almost all of the time, because Britain, the best British control cards are fighters, bombers, and artillery, so they're all just going to be in the support line. The best control cards in Germany are incredibly large tanks without blitz that you just deploy. There's the King Tiger, which you kind of want to keep in the support line anyways, so all of your stuff is untargeted. There's the Leopold, which is an artillery. And these cards, King Tiger, can be affected by this, because it is not a targeted effect, so you can kill King Tiger, you can kill Leopold and King Tiger with Naval Engagement. Soviets, oh my goodness, Soviet France, the Rima deck, that deck is built around just having 4 units in your support line at all times, and this Naval Engagement is just going to destroy all of them, no matter what they are. This is just like a Stars and Stripes on steroids for control mirrors. And I'm not saying you necessarily run 2 of these. I think it definitely is very meta-dependent, but just a single copy of these, 1 copy of Destroy the Enemy Support Line, to be run in any major nation control deck, I think is a ton of potential, and I think this card is going to see competitive play, if not immediately, but definitely in the future. Then we have the MEBF 110. I got to reveal this card with Birdo on the Pauper live stream. It's a 4-cost, 2-operation German fighter, 4/4. Deployment gets a blitz if you control the front line. Now, as I mentioned on that stream, I think that this card is very, very interesting, because Germany is getting, if you control the front line, cards. That's an effect that has been traditionally associated with US. However, Germany has been traditionally the most associated ally nation, as well as any sort of German aggressive deck has most typically been associated with US ally. So I think it's really interesting to have this card to potentially see play in US-German or German-US mid-range decks. 4-cost, 2-operation, 4/4 blitz fighter. I just don't think that body is going to be necessarily competitive at a high tier. I don't think that card is I just think that card is not great. I don't think it has what is necessary to be tier 1. However, if you are a lower collection player, this is a really easy card to add in. And if in the future there's more German air support, I could see this potentially being a good card. I think this has potential in a sort of combined arms joint operation style mid-range deck, because there's not a lot of great mid-cost German fighters. And if you're playing a deck that's going to be running infantry and tanks, you're going to want to have control of the front line, so this gets potentially better. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about this card. Then we have ASW Patrol, which is a 7-cost US order. Gain 3 credit slots. So we have War Machine, 2-cost, gain 1 credit slot. Hour of Need, 4-cost, gain 2 credit slots. We now have 7-cost, gain 3 credit slots. However, it has the additional text, if US is ally, meaning if the US is the minor nation, destroy a random enemy unit also. So it's essentially a death from above attached onto the gain credit card if you are not a US main deck. And I think that's very interesting, because US main is going to be the decks that are going to best be able to exploit ludicrous credit gain, since they are the decks that have the 10-cost, 3-operation blitz, Pershing and B-17F, as well as the 15-cost, 4-operation cost Super Fortress. There's the mass deployment, which you gain additional stuff for the number of credit slots you have. So all of the really, really powerful cards for having tons of credit slots are US main, meaning that this card is just going to be less useful in the deck that it is best in, which I think is really, really good design choice, because you can then run this in a British-US ramp or a Soviet-US ramp that might not need a card like 7 cost, gain 3 credit slots. However, you gain the additional death from above effect on top of that makes you actually think, well, maybe I do want to run this card. So I think it actually is really well designed and makes some interesting choices in building ramp decks. And my one problem with this is it has nothing to do with the card itself. It has to do with war bonds. Why did you rotate war bonds and not Hour of Need? Because one, I just think war bonds is way more iconic than Hour of Need. Two, I think having US ramp having some sort of US main draw, even if it's a single card, would still have been nice. And three, there is going to be players who are going to hit turn 2 War Machine, which means on turn 3 they have 4 credits and play Hour of Need, which means on turn 4 they have 7 credits, so they play ASW Patrol, and then on turn 5 they are going to have 11 credits and can play anything they want. And that is just very, very powerful. Like, it means if you hit the absolute nuts, you can get to 11 credits on turn 5, and that's completely insane. Whereas if War Bonds was the one that was not rotated and Hour of Need was rotated, it means you could, at max, do that on turn 6, which is slightly better. I'm not a huge fan of having this potential just ramp high roll, but, you know, what can you do? Then we have a not-so-good card, the 185th Brigade. It is a 4-cost British Guard 1-8, deals plus 3 damage to HQs. So Seaforth is a 4-cost 1-7, has plus 3 attack on enemy's turn. So it's essentially a 4-cost 4-7. This is a 4-cost 1-8. That is a 4-8, exclusively when attacking the opponent's HQ, but it's a 1-8 guard. Why? The Soviets have the 3-cost 1-8 guard, no text, and that is miles better than this, and that sees no play. Now, the one saving grace, well, I'd say 2 saving graces. One, Naval Support is a British card. That is the 2-cost order set at a unit's attack equal to its defense, so if you want to play a Naval Support deck, this can pretty easily become a 4-cost 8-8 guard. Not that great, since you have to spend an additional card to get that, and then if it's retreated, it goes back to being a 1-8. And there is this 1 attack theme. It does have 1 attack, so if you have this down with the new British Elite, it's a 3-8 guard, and then if you get it to the front line with the British Elite and you're attacking to the face, then suddenly it's dealing 6 damage a hit. But again, this kind of feels like pack filler, almost. I don't want to say pack filler because there's going to be players who are going to play this card and they're going to be glad this card came out and they're going to have a lot of fun with this card. But this is going to see 0 play in anything remotely competitive. And then we have a card which has a lot of potential to see play in competitive, the 35th Infantry Regiment for Poland. It's a 3-cost 1-5 guard, which on its own, it has the worst unit type, really terrible stats, and it costs 3 for those terrible stats, so it's going to need a killer effect, and that effect is when an enemy unit moves into the front line, your units get +1/+1. All of your units get +1/+1, including this, which is absolutely insane against certain decks. Now, obviously, if it's against frontline, this card is absolutely atrocious, and if it's against control, this card's not going to be too great, because most control decks are just going to be removing stuff with orders, and they don't really care if you play this card. But if you're playing against something like Jaguar or Frontline, if you just play a 1-cost unit on 1 and a 2-cost unit on 2, and then you play this 35th Infantry Regiment on 3, and your opponent, I don't know, had a bad hand, or maybe you played a 1-cost unit on 1, and then a 2-cost unit on 2 that destroys one of your opponent's units, and then you play this on 3, and your opponent tries to move up a 35T. Suddenly this 1-5 guard is a 2-6 guard, and those 2 other units you had to get +1/+1, and now this 35T no longer gets the value hit on it. So maybe they move up a Cavalry Regiment to go alongside the 35T, and then this is suddenly a 3-7, and the other 2 units have +2/+2. So this can snowball out of control really, really fast, and I think it's quite interesting, and it fits into this alternate Polish archetype. Like, we have the Legions, we have the Exile. There's this other Polish archetype that has received by far the least love, which is sort of this survives combat damage, let the enemy come to the front line and try to hold them there deck, which I think I think that deck is miles away from being anywhere near good, but I think you could potentially run this card in something like a US Poland midrange, maybe like a a Soviet Poland control that's a very unit heavy, and you just run this card sort of on its own, and not with any of the other package of slow down the frontline stuff, because you don't want too many of those cards. And I think that could have definite potential. Then we have a really funny card. It is HMS Homies, to replace the HMS Illustrious that's being rotated. It is a 6-cost British order, fill your support line with swordfish. Now, unlike HMS Illustrious, these swordfish will not have blitz. So it's similar to No Surrender, except those have blitz. So it's fill your support line. If you have 3 units in your support line, this is 6 cost, summon a swordfish. If you have no units in the support line, this is 6 cost, summon 4 swordfish, which is really, really good. Now, the problem is, it's cost 6, and Empire Strikes is being rotated, and they can't attack immediately. So, like, if air just became much slower, and you could afford to play a card like HMS Hermes, and then your opponent has to respond to it, and if they don't, then you start slamming down Cass, and suddenly you have, like, multiple 3-5 bombers that are all attacking, and you snowball out of control. However, you have to get to that point, which I think is going to be very, very hard. So I don't want to say this card is unplayable, because maybe air has enough to just play much, much slower. And against certain decks, specifically not frontline, I think this card could be better than a card like Wrath Lightning. I know a lot of people are running Mosquitoes again. I think it could be better than Mosquito in certain matchups. Because if you're a deck that doesn't have a ton of AoE, like say you're German Control, and you're like sudden striking all of the units that are coming down, and they play a Wrath, you annihilate it. They play HMS Hermes, and you're already down a route out, you don't have your Schwalbe. What do? You can't just triple sudden strike Flam Panzer this. I mean, even if you have that, you do that once, and you're just going 4 for 1. So I think there's a world where maybe this card sees some play in a much slower deck. Now, obviously, in Classic mode, people will have access to this, and HMS Illustrious, and Empire Strikes, and maybe it'll see play in, like, Classic air decks. But, all around, I think this is a pretty interesting card, and it'll be interesting to see if people can manage to find a way to fit it in. Then we have Blenheim Mark II. It is a 4-cost, 3/3 British bomber. Deals double damage if the front line is empty. Now, this card, right away, seems really terrible. Now, I think there is some potential for this card, specifically in an OTK deck, because double damage is very, very powerful. And if the front line is empty, it's very, very easy for British to set up, because Delaying Tactics is a card, which is a 2-cost order to retreat all units from the front line. And it can be easily reduced to 1 operation cost, whether it's Pioneer or a Aerial Reconnaissance, something like that. So then if you do Blenheim, Delaying Tactics, Finest Hour to give Blenheim Blitz, that's immediately an 8 damage attack, which, not great, granted. However, if you then play a synthetic rubber on it, now obviously research is being rotated, but say for the sake of argument you play synthetic rubber, now you could do like a final push, something in Soviets, and you get its attack up to, say, 8. Suddenly it's a 16 damage combo. But what if you play 4 final pushes, and a Delaying Tactics and the Finest Hour? Now, obviously, this is a huge card, a ludicrous setup, but suddenly it's a 32 damage OTK. So, it's not a great card. It's not, that does not sound like a great OTK deck. It just sounds like a worse version of the old Spitfire OTK deck. However, it could be fun. Those OTK lovers out there, you might want to get your hands on this card and try to make that work. And last but not least, for this video, we have the 39th Panzer Grenadiers, a 3-cost, 1 operation, 4/3 German infantry, with the text, has +2 attack while in the front line, which is not great. Like, it's a 6-3 in the front line. Okay. But then it has the deployment effect, swap a position with a friendly unit, which means this can immediately enter the front line if you have a unit in the front line that you can pull back, which would be quite interesting. It also means you could switch 2 units around in the support line if you want to guard a different unit, or say you have something like the SD that gives adjacent units attack buffs. You can move that to be adjacent to different units. I mean, I think most typically you're going to be using this to move it immediately into the front line. And I don't think that's going to be a great card. Like, I don't think it's going to be a good card. However, it's an incredibly fun card, and it's an incredibly big brain card, and I really like the design on this, and I'm really looking forward to cards like this in the future. Like, I think, so far, Cards has not necessarily had the most, sort of more innovative card texts like this, and I think this is a sign that they are now going to be moving towards that direction. And that is something that I'm very excited about, because I think this is a really, really interesting design, the swap positions. And there's always the turn 1 wombo combo of the 554th, which is the 0 operation cost 1/1 Soviet infantry. You move it to the front line for 0, you play Iron from the north, and then you play this 39th Panzer Grenadier to move this, swap its positions with the 554th, to get a 6-3 in the front line on turn 1. And all that requires is 3 cards, all 3 of which are standards. Oh, sorry, well, 2 are standards, and this is a limited. Now, how good is that? Not that great. Like, it can literally just be answered by a Red Dawn. But it's really cool. And I'm happy with this. I think a lot of the cards that have been seen so far are either potential cards in a new decks, or are just really, really cool cards that I'm happy exist. There's almost nothing so far that has been revealed that it's just sort of like, oh, that's kind of boring. Like that does nothing for me. Everything so far is at the very least kind of cool. And I really like that. That's something I really like about Cards. 1939. So many other card games I've seen and played, like half of the cards in a new expansion are completely terrible, uninteresting, and never going to see play. Now, you can argue that a lot of these cards will never see play competitively, but at least they're interesting, and it gives people who play fun decks, which is a large part of the Cards community, new things to try out. So, that brings us to the end of this video. This was the first 23 revealed cards, so expect maybe 3, maybe 4 more videos like this, where I will go over the other cards as they are revealed. And keep an eye out on my channel. I might be revealing a card or 2 of my own in the future. So, with that, I will sign off. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.